Good evening, everybody. It's John here from Tutor2, welcoming you along to another of our live streams for A-Level Geography. And tonight we are on the fourth of our little batch of live streams and our second looking at resource security. So resource security, slightly different from some of the topics that we were looking at last week. Looking at it in a slightly different way. Now, if you've not been to one of our live streams before, welcome to you. We are going to ask you a series of questions as the evening goes on, as well as giving you some tips and pieces of advice about the topic. When we get to the point where we're asking you questions, we would love to see your responses in the chat window. So do use the chat window if you have that available to you. We're going to be using a PowerPoint tonight, which will be available for you to download pretty much as soon as we have finished this live stream, and this is being recorded, so if you wanted to you could watch it all over again. Now I'm not going to be talking to you about resource security at all. I'm going to leave that to the experts, which is what I have with me tonight. I have Fiona in the middle of the screen and Brendan on the right hand side. Good evening both.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good stuff. Shall we get started, guys?
Let's go straight away. Absolutely. So the first activity is called news headlines. And it's a little bit like what you may have seen on Have I Got News For You, where there are headlines and there are missing words. So do not worry if you get them wrong. It's just designed to get you thinking about these kind of issues. So we are looking at resources, and a lot of what we're looking at tonight will be to do with, mineral resources, things that we get out of the ground. So that's a bit of a clue. And the two missing words here are, I'm not going to tell you yet. Have a think. There are two words, not one. So it says COP host UAE plans biggest something something in the world. So if you fancy having any little guesses, just jot down the two words you think they might be in the chat. Okay, let's reveal the correct answer. The correct answer is oil expansion. So researchers have found that the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, also known as ADNOC, has plans for oil and gas expansion, which are in clear conflict with their role as the COP28 host. COP26 is in Glasgow, and the issue is obviously one of conflict of interest there. Let's move on to the next question. So this one is going to be one word. It's a very short word. China's CO2 emissions could something in 2023. I'm not going to give you too much of a clue here, but it's something, it's a concept that you do need to be aware of if you're studying lots of things to do with energy and other resources. So have a think, jot down, it's only 4 letters. You can jot it down in the chat if you want to. Okay, let's reveal the correct answer. The correct answer is peak. So China's CO2 emissions could peak in 2023, and that would be followed by some sort of structural decline and the rapid growth of renewables. And they're soaring ahead with the development of wind and solar, as far as we understand. So their installations have increased by 210 gigawatts this year alone, which is twice the solar capacity of the US and 4 times what China added in 2020. So very, very rapid progress there. Let's move on to the next activity, which is called categorize. And with categorize, if you haven't seen it before, you're going to have 60 seconds. There's a little clock there that will start ticking in a minute. It might even have some jolly sort of tunes going with it. So you have 60 seconds to categorize these facts 3 ways. These facts about fossil fuels, and you have to categorize them 3 ways by fuel type. So have a look at the numbers there, and all you have to do in the chat, if you want to type them there, is just put C or O or N, and then just type the numbers you think go with it. So let's start the clock. Five seconds left. Okay, let's reveal the correct distribution of those ideas. So they go 3 ways. Coal is going to be associated with the word dirty because it's high sulfur content unless it's processed, which is not always the case. It's very bulky, it takes a lot of room and very heavy and difficult to transport. It can be transported, but it's very difficult. Oil, on the other hand, is relatively cheap and flexible, and it uses submarine pipelines. And the idea of doing that goes back a long way. There was even a pipeline during the Second World War between UK and France following D-Day. And natural gas, the cleanest fossil fuel, and it can be transported via pipeline or tanker as liquid natural gas. You may have seen tankers, they often have a distinct, I think it's an orange colour, and they carry the gas in very pressurised containers. A few other little facts to throw in there. Coal, China is the biggest producer, and they use it a lot, as many other countries do, in smelting for metals and in chemical industries for heating, but also to gain chemicals from coal. Oil, the leading producers are really probably Saudi Arabia and the USA, and it's a very fundamental material, raw material in the petrochemical industry, and not just for fuels, but for all sorts of other things as well. And the natural gas, the leading producers would be Russia and the USA, and fracking is potentially an abundant source of that, but it hasn't always been developed for various reasons. So a little discussion point there. We're not going to go into it now, but it says natural gas is the cleanest fossil fuel. Discuss, but not now. Let's move on to the next task. So we're going to have a look at, just go through a few of the different kind of resources, and you have to be quite good at evaluating different resources. So if we look at nuclear, it is contentious. There are profound safety concerns. There's the concern of nuclear fuels becoming part of a military use. So nuclear proliferation would be an issue. Radioactive waste management can be very tricky as well because of the long-lasting nature of radioactive materials. There are strong geopolitical risks and the location of uranium. So, where do you get the uranium from? That can often overlap with geopolitical issues. On the other hand, it's considered to be clean in the sense that it produces very low amounts of greenhouse gases compared to some other fuels. And you don't need a lot of it to make quite a bit of energy. So it's got a high energy density. It's something that is really mainly associated with highly developed economies because the initial costs and the on costs, the maintenance, so on, it's very scientifically demanding. So historically, Germany and Japan have been involved, but more consistently, it would be USA, UK, and France. Then there's an increasing use in major economies, including China and India. So we must be aware of that as well. Let's move on to the next fuel, which is biomass. So this is derived from organic materials such as plants, waste products, organic waste products, including wood and crop residues and biogas. It is a renewable energy solution in the sense that it'll never run out. We can always produce more. So in that sense, it can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It provides energy security if there's enough of it, and it can promote sustainable waste management as well. Let's move on to the next one, which is hydroelectric, sometimes called HEP, hydroelectric power, where we harness the energy that's created as water flows very fast past turbines to generate electricity. So it can provide a very reliable and renewable energy source. So the greenhouse gas emissions are quite low, very minimal. People would argue that the setup costs have produced quite a lot of greenhouse gas emissions because of the concrete involved in building dams. That's another issue. They have long operational lifespans, so they last a long time, and can serve as a very flexible and efficient means of electricity storage. So there's just to run through some of those key points there. Let's move on now to Data Lab. So the issue with Data Lab is that what we're trying to do here is present you with some data that maybe you haven't seen before, something unseen, so you can apply your knowledge to a novel situation. This is a challenge that you're asked to do in the examinations. And we're going to ask that you describe, but not necessarily explain the data in this particular question. So let's have a look at it. I'm just going to talk you through a few aspects of this. So in A-level, the specification requires that you learn about a range of cartographic and graphical skills, including GIS. In other words, data visualizations. You could face a possible 6-mark question instead of analyze the data, asking you to evaluate the style of presentation. So you do need to know about different styles of presentation. And with this particular graph here, we're looking at something that's not a standard bar graph, it's a compound bar graph. Sometimes it's known as a stacked bar graph. So compound bar graph is in the specification. If there are any of those kind of things in the specification you don't understand, please do check with your teacher. It's also a horizontal bar graph because the data is visualized sideways and not vertically, rather like happens in a population pyramid. So it's always good to look at the metadata around the graph, including the key. Have a look at the key. It's a bit small, but I'll read it out for you in case you can't read it very well. So the purple color is fossil fuels. The greeny blue is nuclear per capita. And the definite color green there is renewables per capita. So those colours don't contrast all that well. So if that's an issue for you, make sure you've let your examination officer know about any kind of issues you have with different colours, because that could be an issue in an exam. So your task is to analyse this data about energy source per capita shown in the diagram. And we're going to give you a minute to do so. Go for it. Just remember to treat it carefully because it's a compound bar graph. So each bar is divided up according to the colour key at the top. 20 seconds left. Okay, time is up. And let's have a look at some key points you might have made. You may have jotted these in the chat as well. Okay, so big picture is important to start off with. The largest amount of energy from fossil fuels in 2022. And the anomaly is Sweden at 26%. There's a dependence on fossil fuels in the United States, Australia, Japan, South Africa, and India. The world average is 82%, incidentally. The total per capita energy varies considerably. So the United States and Canada is 10 times that of India. And nuclear per capita isn't relevant for Australia, though the flaw with the graph is the skull. Nuclear per capita is not clear in Brazil or India. So that kind of data is important for you to have a look at. And if you ever want to test yourself on those, you can see the source is an excellent website called Our World in Data. So take a look at that so that you can test yourselves on other forms of unseen data. Over to Fiona.
Okay, well done to those of you that have contributed. Let's see if we can carry on with that contribution with our next activity, which is the connection spinner. So during this activity, we're trying to make connection between the concept in the middle and those around the outside. Now, we're going to give you some time to think through what the connection might be. So if we spin the connection, we're landing on energy consumption. So if we'll just give you a few moments now just to think about what is the connection between energy supply and energy consumption. So if you have any ideas, pop them in the chat. There's lots of different ways that we can connect these two concepts. Okay, so if we reveal the answer and think about what is the connection. So the answer here is that supply and consumption may drive the other or limit it. We might also consider it in relation to the changing energy mix of a country. So we might think, well, the energy supply is changing, so the energy consumption must change. If we have a greater availability of energy and it is cheaper and there are fewer blackouts, this will promote use. However, it will also increase industrial growth, which then may mean that there is more supply and we could end up having feedback loops. We can also have a look at the link between conserving energy and energy supply and energy consumption. So when we try to conserve energy by turning off our lights and instructing people to wear jumpers rather than turn on their heating and do small scale domestic strategies to reduce our energy consumption, it may then make the supply chains a little bit easier and less stress on perhaps something that could be quite strained. And another connection that we might make is whether or not renewable energy is difficult to store. That is one debate that we could have, because if we cannot store and make the supply last in all time frames, then we might have to change our energy consumption. So let's spin the wheel again and see what else we need to make connections between. So this time we're trying to make connections between energy supply and globalization. So again, I'll give you a few moments there to have a go at sharing your thoughts in the chat around the link between energy supply and globalization. Some excellent points there, B. Well done. So if we were to look at the links between energy supply and globalization there, so now we're thinking about linking this topic with global systems and governance, let's reveal what our talking points are here. So we've got growing energy demand can necessitate more interconnected and diverse energy supplies to support economic development and trade. So essentially, we're increasing the importance of our international cooperation, our energy security, sustainable energy concerns, and our cross-border relationships. Those can be trade relationships or they could be geopolitical relationships. And they can then factor in with affecting stability, and a decrease or a breakdown in global relationships with other countries can then affect the energy supply. Excellent answers again. Well done. Thank you for the chat. So we're back to our news headlines. So again, just one word answers here. What could you suggest was missing from this headline? So world production is falling behind something critical to energy transition. What is missing? What phrase could be in that gap? Phrase or words that could be in that gap. Any suggestions? Some really great answers coming in still from the previous activity, so really well done on those. So good activity to linger on, to think about, and to go back over and rewatch the video and think, well, how can I link to the other concepts around the outside? So let's reveal the answers for this one. So copper is critical to energy transition, so making the jump between non-renewable and renewable energy. Let's do one more before we go through some content. So Chile rejects $2.5 billion iron and copper mine planned near where? Any thoughts? Pop them in the chat. Okay, let's reveal the answer. This may have been a case study of yours, or it may not. So near a penguin reserve. So copper, the demand is expected to increase twice as much by 2035, which is not far from now. And that's due to the energy transition. And Chile has been perhaps sustainable and reflective on the environmental impact and the ecological impact of these mines, as they've rejected a very, very, very large amount of money for a company to build this copper mine and to build the infrastructure that is needed for this copper mine, because it is near a penguin reserve. And actually, it's also going to if it was built, it'd also threaten the dolphins and whales in the area as well. So it's a very important headline because it shows that countries are considering the impacts. They're doing an environmental impact assessment that we looked at last lesson to determine whether or not that should go ahead. So well done. Thank you for playing along there. Let's go through some content now. So we're looking here at copper sources. We've mentioned copper a lot so far, so let's go into it. So the global pattern of copper or sources are influenced by the geological factors. So it's found in igneous rocks, including the presence of copper-rich deposits. Its economic considerations and the geopolitics. And we might note that Chile is the largest producer of copper globally. Peru follows very closely behind that. But Australia, Indonesia, the US, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Russia, Mexico are all key players in here. So it's quite spread out across the globe, and we're not really concentrated in any particular areas. The highest production is in South America, but other major players are spread out across Africa, across Asia, across the Pacific, and across North America. So it's a very global issue. So looking now at the copper sources and a bit more about the dynamics in that industry. So as we said, copper is mostly produced in Chile, with more than twice the next producer in Peru. And the dynamics can change over time. So this may not be true in 3, 5, 7, 10 years' time, because exploration is currently undergone by many countries because they're trying to find their own sources of copper. There are also technological advancements. So as we talked about the difference between reserves and resources last lesson, we had a look at whether or not something, just because we have something available to us, we know it's there. If we can't access it, if we don't have the technology or the economy to access this, then we cannot consider it as viable. But this may change over time, and also shifts in demand and prices. So for example, if there was something else that has been discovered to become more important or more valuable than copper in the energy transition, then they may shift the production of copper onto something else. So it all does depend on how the sort of quaternary industry is changing around the production, consumption, and design of these materials. And if we go on to this last slide here on copper consumption. So copper is a crucial component in construction and infrastructure projects and regions undergoing significant development. So it's really, really important in those emerging developing economies. China is the largest consumer, driven by its rapid industrialization, urbanization, and infrastructure development. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise there. They do consume a lot of the world's resources. And demand is closely tied to construction and manufacturing of electrical and electronic applications. So we know that China is a developing country that's developing lots of infrastructure, is a key player in the electrical and electronic trade across the world, and is also wanting to invest in renewable energy to serve its large population. So we can see why it is such a large player in the copper consumption. And if we move on to copper use now, we can see that its main uses are in the electronics industry, so in wiring, connectors, various electronic components. And as I said previously, as technology advances, the demand for electronic devices increases globally. So does the consumption of copper at the moment, although this could change. So we're talking about something that has changed in the past and might change in the future. But to our current understanding, we expect copper demand to rise. It's also used in the automotive industry, as we'll see on the next slide, and aerospace industries. So they rely again on for wiring, motors, and various components, and is key in the transition to electric vehicles, which will boost copper demand further. And its last use for us to talk about today is in the energy sector. So it has a crucial role in electrical transmission and distribution, and is key in creating solar and wind power to increase consumption. Now we're going to take a look at some exam practice. So we've got a 9 marker here for you. So the question is, assess the impact of geopolitics on the global energy trade. Now, if you're rewatching this, you can always pause this here, have a go at planning your answer, annotating around the question. What does it want from me? So it'd be a good idea to pause here if you would like to have a go at doing this question or planning out this question before we talk through it. But let's proceed with what we need to talk about. So our assess is to weigh up. The impact, we need to think about positive impact. Is it negative? Is it an unfair impact? Has it impacted significantly, or has it impacted insignificantly on the geopolitics of the global energy trade? So has the production, distribution, and consumption of energy been shaped by any kind of geopolitics? So nation to nation or bloc to bloc. So individual relationships between countries or within trading blocs. So what could you talk about for this question? If we hang with this slide for just 30 seconds, has anyone got any ideas they could contribute in the chat of what they could write? So maybe if you think, what could my paragraph title be? If I had to give my paragraph a title, what would it be? What key concepts or ideas would I want to share to help answer this question. What roads could I go down? I'll just give you a quick sort of 10 and 15 seconds. Anyone got any thoughts that immediately jump to mind that they could talk about? Okay, let's take a look at some of the ideas that we could explore in this 9-marker. So in this 9-mark question, these could be considered paragraph titles if you were looking for roads to go down. So we wouldn't be expected to write about all of these, but you could link a few of them together and explore in a few. So well done, B. Just like we said in this slide, so see that you probably put this down just before we changed slides. So pipelines shut from Russia to Germany as a result of Russia-Ukraine war. So one of the things we could talk about here, just like B says, is the pipeline politics. So this is part of our energy infrastructure. So we could write that global politics has an impact on energy infrastructure, and that you might get disputes and political struggles over these pipelines. And we could refer to that conflict, the war in Ukraine. And we could refer to it being perhaps a significant problem for the EU, and because the EU gets most of its natural gas supply from Russia. So we would weigh up, we would assess how impactful that has been. Another avenue that we could go down would be the resource richness and dependency. So that is whether or not a nation is rich in energy resources, because if you've got something that everybody else wants, that makes you more influential. It's going to give you more geopolitical power. And the opposite is also true. If you don't have something and you need a lot of it, you don't have very much power to play with here. So you might have to concede a policy geopolitically because you're making a trade-off between this policy and your energy needs. Another route that we could go down is the OPEC dominance. So the OPEC group play a central role in geopolitics of oil. They actually adjust the production to influence price. So we could discuss how that is a geopolitical strategy that is affecting the global energy trade. We could also go down the idea of strategic choke points. So we've got the Strait of Hormuz, which is a key area where nearly all of the world's oil shipments go through. So if that was blocked or under occupation, then the world would have a significant problem with the oil trade, and a lot of places would have a very strained oil energy supply. And then also we could consider the result of international conflicts. So you could probably link international conflicts in with pipelines and strategic choke points. So that could be territorial disputes, so countries disputing over who owns a place in order to explore for energy. So one example of this is you could again link to global systems and governance, and you could take a look at the possible territorial disputes over Antarctica when the current treaty is disbanded or if it's not renewed. And that mostly will be due to countries wanting to perhaps drill or survey for oil and other key energy trade supplies. So that could be one part there. Another and final avenue that you could go down, and this isn't an exhaustive list, is the global energy transition. So thinking about the countries that are actually making the transition now early because they've got the money, they've got the infrastructure, and they've got the knowledge to switch to renewable energy, they might become the most geopolitically influential in the next decade or 20 years as the entire globe makes this switch. So some ideas here, some good ideas in the chat. Thank you, B, again, for talking about Chinese investments in Central African countries. So you've got your neo-colonialism, again, a reference to your GSG unit, and thinking about how China might invest in certain countries within Africa and build infrastructure, build railways, build roads, invest in services for the country, with the trade or the priority for trade for a lot of key minerals and ores that are needed for the energy trade, and also possibly also for oil and gas as well. So some interesting points we could talk about there. Have a go at this question at home, pause the video, give yourself 10 to 15 minutes, see if you can write out a couple of paragraphs on some of these ideas. We're just going to move on now to Brendan, who's going to do a couple of true or false questions with you.
Many thanks, Fiona. Okay, so we're going to do a few true or false questions over the next few moments. We want you to look at the statements, and very straightforward, you just decide, is that statement true or is it false? And you can type T or F in the chat. You don't even have to type the full word. So the first statement, is this true or false? Energy demand in the UK will be much higher in the future. Is that true or false? Let's see what people think. Okay, so at least one person is saying true. Is that correct? No, it's false. So this is a bit of a myth-busting question, I suppose. This is what people that were modelling energy demand used to think. But electrification of many activities is reducing inefficiencies that were seen with burning fossil fuels. And in fact, energy demand has already fallen quite considerably, around about 25% since 2008. And that's before mass electrification of supply. So this is something that will happen with transition to greater use of renewables. So that may have been a bit of a surprise. Let's have a look at the second statement. Is this true or false? Solar and wind costs have plummeted in the last decade. What do we think about that? T or F, true or false? Make your guesses. And let's reveal. It's actually true. It's correct to say this. And the cost of solar power has fallen very, very considerably by around 90%, wind power by about 70%. And they've gone from being actually one time very expensive to being relatively inexpensive, even perhaps cheap. And this was not something that people thought would happen as quickly as it has. It's mainly due to the fact that there's these sort of technologies have improved and are being produced at greater scale. So they're cheaper and they're more efficient. So solar panels are more efficient, and there are wind turbines that are much bigger and more effective, and that's an ongoing situation. So production at scale is really one of the things that's going on there. Next question for true or false is a statement which says support for renewables amongst the general public is higher than it was a decade ago. Is that correct? Is it true or false? Make your guess, T or F, true or false. We have a guess to say it's true, and is that correct? It is. It's correct to say that that is true. The latest UK government survey showed that 85% of the public supported wind and solar projects. Only 1% were actually opposed to such renewables. And 75% approximately think renewables are good for the economy. This will be a big issue in the forthcoming general election, by the way. Just 12% said they would be unhappy about having an onshore wind farm in their area, and just 7% for a solar farm. So there are issues with NIMBYism about these things, but in general, the support is very strong. Okay, final true or false question in this little set. The statement you have to decide about is this one. Additional land will have to be found for renewables to protect food security. Is that true or false? Is that true or false? Make your guess. Or make your answer. Let's have a look and see what the correct. It's actually false. In the past, there was often the assumption that renewables would have to be placed on new additional land, and that we'd have to give up farms or other land uses to make space for them. But wind power is being combined with farmland, and solar is on farmland. In fact, there's a new, about 5 years now, there's been a new symbol that the Ordnance Survey used for solar farms. You may have spotted it if you've looked at Ordnance Survey maps recently or Digimap for schools. I know I did with one of my classes a couple of weeks ago. And that's got a quite a nifty key term called agrivoltaics. So a combination of agriculture and volts, combining that there. And that's there's growing support for that. Back to you, Fiona.
Okay, let's take a look now at what the future might bring. And this will lead us on to a possible 20 marker that we could have in the exam. So in the future, we do have alternative ideas about what it will bring, but these all depend on technological, economic, environmental, and political factors. So for technology, we have advances in renewable energy, water management practices, and sustainable mining techniques that are pivotal to ensuring viability and responsible use of these resources. So we're depending on technology to help us improve our environmental sustainability, but also our access to a lot of these resources. Economic factors like the cost of competitiveness of alternative energy. So now that solar and wind energy is getting much cheaper, this is then putting pressure on the other energy sources to become cheaper as well, because they're losing out because they're not as competitive. And there's also a demand for minerals in industry, which will play a central role. So the resources will only become cheaper if they can be fed by a supply of minerals and ores within the industry. And if there's a plentiful supply of that, then that will keep it cheap. When that starts to run out, then prices will rise again. Environmentally, we need to consider climate change and ecosystem preservation. And as we saw with Chile, lots of countries are really considering the international kickback when they would prioritize economic gain over environmental preservation. And they are then focusing on sustainable practices in energy, water, and mineral extraction. And in the future, we might also have political developments with policies, including government regulations, international agreements, and geopolitics. So what will happen with the result of the war in Ukraine when it comes to our pipeline politics? What will happen with the result of the war between Israel and Palestine when it comes to water conflicts? So we've got a lot of considerations that we need to think about politically, with looking at how the world might change and how the geopolitical landscape might change in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and whether or not that will impact on any of our policies, agreements, or resource availability. So that's one to consider, and one that you might consider if we're looking at a 20 marker. So a possible 20 marker that you could have is to consider how our access or our availability of resources might change. And this will have some speculation. You will be asked your opinion here. And whilst your opinion is based on evidence, so you will look at the previous 10 or 20 years and think about predicting patterns that might happen, and you'll look at what the experts are saying. So there will be evidence in your answer. You will also need to put your opinion across. And the most important thing that the examiner tells us to do for our 20 markers is to take a position, pick your argument, and follow it through the essay. So you should show some consideration for the other side, but don't linger on it too much. You don't want a completely balanced answer. You don't want to be on the fence by the end of the question. And your conclusions should definitely be preceded by the same argument. So you can't change your mind in the confusion. And the best thing to do when you are approached with a 20 marker where it is asking your opinion, and for all 20 markers, is to make sure that you are planning sort of for 3 to 5 minutes before you do 20 minutes on this 20 marker, to make sure that you're clear with what your argument is going to be. So thank you for listening and playing along today. If you wanted to look back at our first live stream, there's a link to it here on this slide, and we have the teaching resource pack available to download for you. And that concludes our resource availability.
Brilliant. Just checking my microphone there. Thank you. Thanks particularly to those of you who have contributed to some of the live chat tonight. I recognise that we've got a little bit of a lag between us actually projecting or streaming and you picking it up. So we have not necessarily been able to see your live responses as we go along. So massive thank you to those of you who did contribute to there. Of course, huge thank you to Fiona and Brendan for delivering that. It's really informative stuff. Very, very valuable. But that is it. We have come to the end of our set of live streams. Just a general reminder, this and the other 3 that we've done over the last few weeks have PowerPoints which are available for you to download. The one for tonight will be available in a few minutes' time. And of course, the other 3 have been recorded as well. So by all means, do have a look at those again. We'll be back in earnest in the new year with a new set of live streams aimed at supporting students going towards their Year 13 exams. But we're hoping just before Christmas we might have a festive quiz for geography where we'll ask a series of different questions relating to all sorts of different topics and beam that one live as well. So do look out for that on the TutorTube website. That will be advertised at a point very soon, I'm sure. So again, thanks to everybody who's contributed. Thanks to Fiona, thanks to Brendan, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.